enjoy the joys and the hopes and the heartbreaks that one faces every day. Now, as we move on to a different chapter in the book of in the book of Genesis, let's take a look at what we wanted to cover as far as blacks in the Bible today. So, I gave it the title of Rereading Ham's Curse because we're told over and over about Ham's curse, but we also, when we're told that, we forget about God's working in this situation. There are those who believe that we're looking at Genesis 9 chapter, verses 20 to 27. There are those who believe that, okay, Ham's curse, evil, bad, blackness, Ham would say the father of black people. Let's look at this a little bit closer. So, what Ham's curse does, it allows us to explore the significant themes that resonate throughout the Bible. We have racial identity and legacy. That's what I was saying earlier. The story delves into the complexities of racial identity, particularly how historical narratives have shaped contemporary experiences. It examines the implications of the biblical curse of Ham and its impact and precept on race. What else does it do? Well, it allows us to take a look at a family and the heritage thereof. The family dynamics in Ham's curse play a critical role by highlighting how heritage influences personal identity. The characters grapple with familial legacies and the burdens they carry. Now, what else does it do? Well, there's societal judgments and prejudice that we can find within Ham's curse. The narrative addresses societal attitudes and prejudices, showing how external perceptions can affect individuals' lives. It critiques the stereotypes and the biases that persist in society. But we also get redemption and forgiveness. The themes of redemption and the possibility of forgiveness are woven throughout, suggesting that individuals can overcome their past and the societal constraints to forge new paths. These themes collectively contribute to the rich exploration of the identity, the history, and the human experience. So, Ham's curse. I did not read carefully enough to realize the words were spoken to Ham, but the curse was for his fourth son, Canaan. So I had to read it again and again because I'm saying, okay, I grew up the curse of Ham, when black people come from the curse, but I asked myself the question, where is the location? Because Noah had three sons and they all located in different aspects. But Ham is the one, or the Hamites, actually located in the area of Africa. So, generally speaking, we understand that this curse was put on Ham's son, Canaan, by the patriarch Noah. Now, it occurs in the context of Noah being drunk. Once the flood was over, he became a husband. He planted vines and he grew grapes. And one night he drank a lot. And he's discovered in his tent by Ham. And this is where our problem begins here, where we get Noah's drunkenness and Noah's nakedness, which is another question I said to myself, so what's the big deal? Well, we go back to Leviticus, and I'll give you the exact verse shortly, that he was not to look on his father's nakedness, even though he was drunk. And what we have is it's a shameful act, and it was perpetuated by the son Ham, who, quote, saw the nakedness of his father. The exact nature of Ham's transgression and the reason Noah cursed Canaan when Ham had sinned have been debated for over 2,000 years. The story's original purpose may have been to justify the biblical subjugation of the Canaanites to the Israelites, or a land claim to a portion of the new kingdom of Egypt, which ruled Canaan and the late Bronze Age. But we have, through the centuries, the interpretation has changed. It is the story that is told by Jews, as we said with Eve. It is told in Christianity. It is told in Muslim, and it was used in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries as an explanation for black skin, as well as for just explanation or justification for the enslavement of black people. Nevertheless, many Christians now disagree with such interpretation because in the biblical text, Ham himself is not cursed, and neither race nor skin color are ever mentioned, not in the Bible. Now, in the biblical narrative, we have the concept of the curse of Ham, which finds its origins in Genesis 9. And if you start reading from verse 20 all the way down to verse 27, you will find all that is there, you know. But we'll talk about the nakedness in a minute. But just the idea that he drank and he, Noah, drank, and that he came in and he uncovered himself. It did not say that Ham uncovered. It said that when Ham came into the tent, Noah was uncovered. Now we'll talk about the reasons that could have been and what things have been said about Ham. So the object of the story may have been just to justify the status of the Canaanites, the descendants of Ham, to the Israelites who were the descendants of Shem. So the narrative itself gives us this curse. It is uncertain what the precise nature of Ham's offense was. So we look in verse 22, and it has also been debated throughout the ages. And we understand that to uncover is a euphemism for gross immorality. So in verse 25, Noah refers to Shem and Japheth as brethren of Canaan, whereas in verse 18, they are identified as his uncles. So in the table of nations, we have Canaan and Mazarine, which is another word for Egypt, among the sons of Ham. And one of the things that we must remember, and the fact that Egypt was equated to Ham, if it was a land claim in Canaan, which fell under the rule of the new kingdom, then Egypt would have had the motive for the curse, but the curse was never on Ham, but on his fourth child. Ham, being via ancient Egypt, ruled over Canaan. But it is Canaan who was his descendants were to be slaves. So it becomes pretty interesting, and it becomes very difficult to say what is what because we have so much. So Ham's transgression. Scholars have debated the exact nature of Ham's misdeed, with many identifying it as either voyeurism, meaning looking, when no one is aware that you are looking, and you shouldn't be looking. That was one of the other. Another was castration, while another was parental incest or maternal incest. All of those have been given as the reason there was a curse on Ham. The voyeurism is that he came into the tent, as we said earlier, and he didn't wake his father, but he was in there. He saw his father's nakedness. In Genesis 9:23, where Shem and Japheth covered their father after Ham came out of the tent and told them that he had seen it. They put a cloak over their shoulders, walked backwards, and covered him. They covered the nakedness. So do we take it as something very little literal in the sense that he just had no clothes on. So much of the artwork associated with this narrative has been that he is painted unclothed. The work had been that he's painted unclothed. And he was in this particular Near East situation, where it was in this first millennium, given a time frame here in Babylonia. We have the idea that the custom was, and the law was, that the son should not look upon the genitals of his father. And that was but how long was he there? What did he do? There are those who said that he tied a string, and that was a form of castration. There are those that he assaulted his father, or that he assaulted his mother. So we get into the parental incest or the castration that we have. But again, we don't really know. We'll be reading what scholars have said. Now let me give you Leviticus 20th chapter and the 17th verse. So the ancient commentators have debated whether seeing someone naked meant to have sex with the person. That's in Leviticus 20:17. The same idea was raised in the 3rd century, where a rabbi who wrote the Babylonian Talmud, that's 500 years after that. There's the idea that perhaps Ham sodomized his father. And then we have in a Greek translation, again, the castration story, but it's also tied to a story from Greek mythology. And then there are the Hittite myths that we have there, for the gods and goddesses had something very similar to this going on. But the fact that we have all of this and no real knowledge here what was going on, that becomes part of the rationale behind Ham's curse. Now we have the maternal incest, and we have written about it, but we won't go into it too much. We're again looking at Leviticus 20th chapter and 11th verse. So, and the man that lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. According to this interpretation of the story, Canaan was the offspring of the illicit union between Ham and his mother, which accounts for the curse falling upon Canaan rather than on Ham. But in either case, we have disrespect thing going on here. And we have in the book of Jubilee, we have a different interpretation going on here for an understanding of Noah being drunk during the festival, and that the offense, whatever it was, it constituted an act of disrespect only to his father, but also to the festival that was going on. The curse of Canaan, because it really in Genesis 9th chapter 25th verse, and here's a quote, and he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be unto his brother." Now, this curse was made by Noah, not by God. Okay? So we have some biblical scholars claim that when the curse is made by man, it can only have been effective if God supported it. However, the curse of Ham and his descendants was not confirmed by God, or at least it is not mentioned in the Bible that God had confirmed it. But this whole story comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have in the book of Jubilee, which is not part of the canon, and it is part of classical Judaism that became part of Christianity. So, as well as Islam, the story of Ham's curse became part of that. So, it was used later to become justification for this concept of slavery. Now, when we talk about this, we could go from the Bible's uh, talking of the curse, speaking of the curse, into 17th, 18th, 19th century, where they justified slavery and the fact that it was biblically accepted. But we are forgetting there's a medieval period in history where serfdom um, was accepted, or even going all the way back. We had slaves in the in the Bible. We had slaves in the New Testament. So what we have here is just more questions. The more you read, the more questions you're going to have. But you got to remember too, without jumping to slavery part or any of the other parts that we have to take a look at the setting. So the curse of Ham is in Genesis, and it occurs after the flood. This is after God had taken away all the evilness that we have there. And we have the key elements. It is post-flood, and it takes place in a new world where the flood, it was a fresh start for humanity. Now, what about the family dynamics? The incident highlights the relationship and the responsibilities within Noah's family, and we have cultural implications. The curse has been interpreted in so many ways throughout history, and it's used basically for servitude. But the themes of shame, respect, disobedience, and the consequences of actions within the family are very prominent. Now, who were the characters? Well, if we take a look at an article written about who was Ham in the Bible, well, he's in the book. He's part of Noah's family. He's in the book of Genesis, and he was singled out for not doing what was customary of the time, not covering his father when he found that his nakedness was apparent. And that's where we get our conflict. His actions are the ones that cause the problem. And again, looking at Genesis 9th chapter, verses 20 to 22, he saw his father's nakedness, and he went outside and he told his brothers instead of covering them up. So when Noah wakes up, he realizes something has happened, and he begins the curse. So that there's a cultural interpretation to Ham's story, and there are historical ones. And the thing that needs to come out of any interpretation is there should have been a lesson of respect. We should have had that. Ham's choice to mock and gossip about protecting or non-protecting his father, that was disrespectful. It was disrespectful. It is like, here we have a commandment coming up, honoring the mother and father. Ham didn't do that. But the legacy of Canaan is important because the curse was on the fourth son of Canaan, And what we have here is the recognition that such a curse would be on the descendants of Ham, including the Canaanites, who were people who had strengths and weaknesses, and the biblical narrative does not endorse racism or prejudice in any way. So the role of Ham in the genealogy in the Bible becomes something to be quite proud of as we go through, because we don't have all of the things that are bad. So Ham's lineage is detailed in Genesis 10th chapter, verses 6 to 20, which summarizes the descendants of Ham, known as the Hamites. So what do we have? We have Cush, often associated with the area of Africa and Ethiopia. We have Mazarine, identified with Egypt. We have Put, traditionally attributed to the regions of North Africa, and we have Canaan. The line will eventually lead to the Canaanites, who played a significant role in the biblical narrative, especially in relationship to the Israelites. There's so much more to say, but our time is running here. But the one thing that we want to remember as we go through this curse of Ham is that except that it was distorted. It was distorted to justify enslavement, servitude. It was definitely distorted. So it's important that we know that there are good things that came out of him. And as you go through, you'll know that the Cushites and, oh my goodness, Egypt, all of them played a role. Um, and if we get a chance to unpack it, you can see that there's so much. The importance of their positions within the Bible. The fact that Ham's the story of Ham allows us to see the other characters that are involved, and that the theme itself, it leads us to Nimrod. It leads us to other characters who are quote unquote Hamites. But we have the story of Ham in a broader sense and broader applications. Um, we had the founding of Babylon. We had stories of Canaan and Nimrod, who serve as a reminder to the importance of what? Obedience, respect for authority, and the consequences of human actions. Disobedience in Eve, disobedience here. So if you get a chance, it's just the very beginning of all of the beautiful things that come out of this story, and understanding that the curse was not to him but to the descendants of him, and understanding the role of Noah's nakedness in this story. But I invite you to join us next time when we take a look at the second book in the Bible, and we will take a look at lights in the Bible at this time. We've given you those nations, the national names of the nations as they're recorded in the table of 10 nations. And when you read through and you see them, and you'll say, very good. So this is a descendant of Ham. This is a descendant of Ham. Cush associated with Ethiopia, Mazaran associated linked with Egypt, Put believed to represent Liberia and Canaan. It was the Hittites and the Jebusites all came out of them. So it's important that we remember the life lessons too. So join us next time as we look at another biblical woman and another life from the Bible. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep reading, keep studying. If you have questions, email us. We have that in the credits as they roll. But as we dive deeper, we will understand that we have to have some modern relevance for quote unquote the curse of Ham. Thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you.